Let me tell you a story about the biggest lottery win in human history and how it ruined the winner. Imagine discovering mountains of silver and controlling entire continents. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire did exactly that. They were the terrifying superpower of their era. With so much wealth, they should have ruled the world indefinitely. But they did not. Instead, they went bankrupt repeatedly, becoming the first serial defaulter in global history. Meanwhile, look at England, a small, rainy island with no silver mines, no global empire, and barely any influence. Yet, fast forward a few centuries, and England became the financial capital of the world, sparking the Industrial Revolution and ruling an empire that made Spain's look small. How did a small, resource-poor island dismantle the richest empire on Earth? Welcome to my channel. Today, I am analyzing the ultimate economic showdown, Spain versus England. This is a profound story about money, innovation, institutions, and a fundamental economic concept dictating the fate of modern nations. We will explore why having all the resources in the world means absolutely nothing without the right system. Let us start with Spain and the infamous resource curse. In 1492, Columbus sailed west, initiating the largest wealth transfer in history. Conquistadors crushed native empires and discovered Potosi. Located high in the Andes, this mountain was basically made of solid silver. Between the mid-1500s and mid-1600s, it produced an estimated 16,000 tons of silver. Spain was flooded with unimaginable cash. But when a country gets a massive windfall of natural resources, it often destroys its own economic foundation. Silver poured into Seville, but the domestic economy could not absorb it. When too much money chases the same amount of goods, you get massive inflation. Prices across Europe quadrupled during the price revolution. Spain made a fatal mistake. Because they had so much silver, they felt no need to make anything themselves. Why build a complex textile industry when you can buy high-quality goods from the Dutch or Italians? Spain became addicted to imports. They exported raw silver and imported finished goods. Their domestic industries died. Economists call this the Dutch disease, where a resource boom destroys domestic manufacturing. Then there was King Philip II. Philip had massive imperial ambitions, fighting incredibly expensive wars across Europe. Wars are financial black holes. Even with American silver, Philip ran out of money. What did he do? He borrowed heavily. He took out massive short-term loans, called asientos, from German and Genoese bankers, using future silver shipments as collateral. But storms delay ships, and war expenses always exceed estimates. When silver did not arrive on time, Philip defaulted. He declared state bankruptcy in 1557, 1575, and 1596. Bankers suffered, and the crown's credit rating was destroyed. Spain lacked a sustainable financial structure. Now, let us cross the English Channel. England in the 16th century was not economically impressive. They had no Potosi and no gold. They only had sheep. For a long time, England was essentially a peripheral raw material exporter. They sheared their sheep and sold the unprocessed wool to Flanders, where skilled Flemish weavers turned it into beautiful cloth. England made pennies, while others made fortunes. But the English state recognized something crucial. You do not get rich selling raw materials. You get rich selling finished, value-added products. So, monarchs implemented an effective industrial policy. They taxed raw wool exports heavily. Concurrently, they actively invited skilled Flemish weavers, many fleeing religious persecution, to settle in England. This was a massive turning point. England started producing broadcloth, a high-quality, dense fabric. This created thousands of jobs and birthed a resilient cottage industry. Families worked in their own homes under the putting-out system, spinning yarn and weaving cloth supplied by merchants. By the early 18th century, the government even passed the Calico Acts to protect this domestic industry from foreign cotton imports. To this day, the seat of the Lord High Chancellor in the British House of Lords is a large bag called the wool sack. It is a literal reminder that England's global power was built on domestic production, not stolen gold. England added value, allowing them to maintain a positive balance of trade. Inevitably, these two contrasting models collided in 1588 when Philip launched the Spanish Armada to invade England. The Spanish built massive high-castle galleons packed with soldiers for hand-to-hand combat. The English, however, embraced technological innovation. They built race-built ships that were lower, faster, and highly maneuverable. Using standoff tactics and heavy artillery, the English harried the lumbering galleons from a distance. Combined with terrible storms, the supposedly invincible Armada was utterly shattered. This victory proved that an adaptable, innovative nation could defend itself against a rigid, overextended empire. But the divergence between Spain and England was not merely economic or military, it was deeply intellectual and institutional. Let us look closely at the intellectual climate. Spain was tightly gripped by the Inquisition. Originally focused on persecuting suspected Jews and Muslims, it later turned its terrifying gaze toward Protestantism. The Spanish crown banned citizens from studying abroad, published indexes of prohibited books, and introduced the death penalty for possessing banned literature. This created a toxic culture of fear. What happens to innovation in a society driven by fear? It dies. Scholars self-censored, diverted their efforts away from STEM fields, or fled the country. While the rest of Europe entered the scientific revolution, Spain violently closed its doors. As Juan Antonio Lorente, a former inquisitor, admitted in 1817, learning exact sciences was impossible without violating the Inquisition's laws. The arts flourished, but scientific output suffered a devastating collapse. England took the exact opposite route. Despite enduring brutal civil wars in the 1640s, England emerged with a culture of intellectual pluralism and open inquiry. They founded the Royal Society to promote experimental science. Brilliant minds like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle freely exchanged revolutionary ideas. Ordinary people gathered in newly established coffee houses to debate science, politics, and complex new credit instruments. And then came the final institutional shift, the Glorious Revolution of 1688. The English Parliament essentially fired King James II and invited William of Orange to take the throne with a massive catch. The new monarchs accepted severe, permanent constraints on royal power. Parliament took absolute control over taxation and the budget. The king could no longer arbitrarily confiscate property or unilaterally default on loans. This triggered a financial revolution. Because Parliament guaranteed the national debt, investors finally trusted the government. When the government issued bonds, people bought them because their property rights were secure. Spain borrowed against the desperate hope that a fleet of silver would arrive. England borrowed against the solid institutional credibility of its parliament. Trust is the ultimate financial currency. Because England had secure property rights, a transparent legal framework, and a culture rewarding innovation, it mobilized capital far more efficiently than Spain ever dreamed of. By the 18th century, Britain financed massive global wars and domestic infrastructure without destroying its economy. They created the Bank of England, pioneered joint stock companies, and laid the deep institutional groundwork that would soon explode into the Industrial Revolution. So, what is the grand overarching takeaway from this epic historical battle? Spain possessed all the natural resources in the known world, but they built an extractive, monopolistic system. They relied on finding wealth rather than creating it. They actively stifled free thought and scientific inquiry. Their absolute monarchs spent recklessly fighting endless wars and destroyed their own credit through serial defaults. They suffered from a massive resource curse. England had virtually no valuable natural resources to speak of, but they built a highly productive, dynamic, and flexible system. They welcomed skilled immigrants and aggressively protected their domestic manufacturing. They embraced scientific inquiry and open debate. Most importantly, they restricted the arbitrary power of their rulers and fiercely protected the property rights of their citizens. This story is a glaring warning for our modern world. Today, we still see countries relying solely on extracting oil, gas, or minerals, suffering from the exact same resource curse, corruption, and economic stagnation that doomed the Spanish Habsburgs. Conversely, we see nations with almost no natural resources dominating global markets through advanced technology, strong democratic institutions, and the absolute rule of law. Spain foolishly bet its future on the Silver Mountain. England smartly bet its future on the woolsack, on production, on human capital, and on institutional trust. History shows us without fail that the system always beats the resource. Architecture always outlasts treasure. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this deep dive into the economic battles of history fascinating, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in the next video.